His wife cannot be present during the reading of the will, Margaret Hartwell, my mother-in-law, declared with that icy smile I knew so well. She is not family by blood. We were in Attorney Thompson's office in Atlanta, a mahogany-paneled room that smelled of old leather and important documents. It was a rainy Tuesday in October, exactly 3 weeks after my father-in-law Robert's funeral. With all due respect, Mrs. Hartwell, I replied, keeping my voice steady as I held my wife Lisa's hand. She's been his daughter for 28 years. She has more right to be here than I do. Margaret laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the quiet room. Stepdaughter, she corrected, emphasizing each syllable as if it were poison. And you know very well that our family never approved of this marriage. My name is James, and at 32 years old, I had just witnessed the most calculated cruelty I had ever seen in my life. It wasn't the first time Margaret had tried to humiliate my wife, but this time she had crossed every line. Lisa squeezed my hand, her fingers trembling slightly. I knew that squeeze. It was the same one she had given me 3 years ago when Margaret had prevented her from speaking at her own sister's wedding, claiming that adopted children have no say in family ceremonies. Attorney Thompson, a bald man in his 60s with bifocals, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, technically, if Mrs. Hartwell is the executor of the will. Exactly, Margaret interrupted, crossing her arms triumphantly. As Robert's widow and the legal mother of his other 2 daughters, I have full authority to decide who participates in this meeting. And Lisa will definitely not be part of it. I felt the blood boil in my veins. During the 15 years Robert lived with us, he treated Lisa like his own daughter. He paid for her college education, walked her down the aisle at our wedding, and always said she was his special little girl. But Margaret had always seen Lisa as an intruder, a threat to her biological daughter's inheritance. This is absurd, I muttered, but Margaret was already signaling to the security guard. Mr. Thompson, she said sweetly, can we proceed? I have important appointments this afternoon. Lisa rose slowly, dignity radiating from her every movement. All right, James. I'll wait in the car. But as she headed for the door, something in Mr. Thompson's expression caught my eye. He looked uncomfortable. Not just because of the awkwardness of the situation, but as if he knew something we didn't. Actually, he said hesitantly, perhaps it would be best if Lisa stayed. There are some specific provisions in the will that may interest her. Margaret turned abruptly. What kind of provisions? The lawyer opened the sealed envelope with slightly trembling hands. Well, let's see. Robert left very clear instructions about who should be present during the reading. And interestingly, he paused, reading the document. He specifically requested the presence of Lisa Hartwell Morrison and her husband James. Margaret's face drained of color. If you're enjoying this story of family manipulation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a cruel mother-in-law can completely underestimate the power of true love. But what really made my heart race was the expression on the lawyer's face as he continued reading silently. A barely perceptible smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, as if Robert had left in a surprise that no one expected. A surprise that was about to change everything. Thompson adjusted his glasses and continued reading, his voice taking on a firmer tone. Robert was very specific. He wrote, I expressly desire that my adopted daughter Lisa and her husband James be present during the reading of this document in its entirety, regardless of any objection from other family members. Margaret choked. That's impossible. Robert would never. There's more, Thompson interrupted, flipping through the pages. He also included a sealed letter addressed specifically to Lisa, with instructions that it be read only in her presence. I felt Lisa squeeze my hand again, but this time there was hope in her fingers. For the past 15 years, Margaret had systematically tried to erase any trace of Lisa's belonging to this family. I remember perfectly the Christmas of 2019, when Margaret forgot to include Lisa's name on the family Christmas cards. Or Lisa's medical school graduation, when Margaret arrived late on purpose and sat in the back row, whispering to anyone who would listen that she didn't understand why they were making such a big deal out of an adopted child. But Robert was always different. He had known Lisa since she was 5, when she arrived at the orphanage after losing her biological parents in a car accident. Margaret agreed to the adoption only because she always wanted 3 daughters, but she treated Lisa like a charity project that never worked out. Robert, on the other hand, saw Lisa as his greatest achievement. He told me once, during a backyard barbecue, that Lisa reminded him of his own mother, determined, intelligent, and unable to accept injustice. She has fire in her eyes, he said, watching Lisa play with our nephews. Margaret never understood that. She thinks she can control Lisa like she controls the other two, but Lisa is different. She fights. And fight she did. When Margaret tried to prevent Lisa from going to medical school, claiming that the family money should go to the real daughters, it was Robert who quietly paid for her entire college education. When Margaret refused to include Lisa in her other daughter's engagement party, Robert organized a separate, larger celebration at his sister's house. Thompson looked directly at Margaret. "Mrs. Hartwell, I understand that this may be unexpected. But as Mr. Robert's attorney for 27 years, I can assure you that he was of sound mind when he drafted this will. In fact, he reviewed it 3 times in the last 2 years. 3 times. Margaret stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Yes. The last revision was made just 6 months before his passing. He was very concerned about ensuring that his true intentions were respected. I watched Margaret's face change color again. She had always assumed that Robert would follow her lead blindly, as he had done in life to avoid conflict. Margaret had a knack for turning any disagreement into a devastating emotional crisis, complete with tears, screaming, and threats to never speak to him again. But apparently, in his final moments, Robert had found a way to speak without Margaret interrupting him. "Well," Thompson continued, "I suggest we proceed according to the instructions in the will. Lisa, please sit here next to James." Lisa walked back to the table with a dignity that had always made me proud. Even after years of Margaret's humiliation, she never lost that elegant bearing that came from the certainty of knowing she was loved by Robert. Margaret settled into her chair like a cornered animal, her eyes darting between the lawyer and Lisa. "This can't be happening," she muttered. "Robert promised me," he said. "What exactly did he promise?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. Margaret shot me a venomous look. "That's none of your business." But Thompson had begun reading again, and his next sentence made the whole world stop. "I, Robert Hartwell, being of sound mind and diseased body, declare that my greatest failure in life has been to allow my wife Margaret to mistreat our daughter Lisa. This will is my attempt to right 23 years of wrongs." The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret had turned white as a sheet, her hands shaking visibly on the mahogany table. Thompson paused and looked at us over his glasses. "Gentlemen, I believe the next few minutes will be quite revealing." I had no idea how revealing they would actually be. Thompson continued reading with a solemnity that made the air in the room grow even heavier. Robert left very specific instructions on how to proceed. He wrote, "Over the past several years, I have quietly documented every insult, every exclusion, every attempt by my wife to make Lisa feel less than a true daughter. This will serve as my belated confession of complicity and my attempt at justice." Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the hardwood floor. That's a lie. Robert never spoke to me about, he never." "Ms. Hartwell," Thompson interrupted gently, "there are 27 pages of documentation attached to this will. Photographs, audio recordings, emails sent to me over the last 3 years. Robert was very thorough." I felt Lisa shudder beside me. Audio recordings. Robert had recorded the humiliations Margaret inflicted on Lisa. Suddenly, I remembered details that had seemed insignificant at the time. Robert always showing up at tense family moments with his phone in his hand, pretending to check his email. The times he accidentally left his digital recorder on during family gatherings. "Impossible," Margaret whispered, but her voice had lost all authority. "He loved me. He would never do that to me." Thompson opened a separate folder and took out a small digital recorder. Robert asked me to play some of these recordings during the reading in case there were questions about the veracity of her allegations. "With your permission, Lisa, I'd like to start with a recording from Christmas 2022. Lisa nodded slowly, her hands clasped in her lap. I remembered that Christmas perfectly. It was the first one we'd spent as a family in the Hartwell home after moving to Atlanta. Lisa was so excited to finally feel like she was part of the family traditions. The tape recorder emitted a soft hiss before Margaret's voice echoed through the room, as clear as if she were speaking at that moment. "Lisa, dear, could you help in the kitchen? The real daughters will stay here decorating the tree. It's a family tradition you wouldn't understand." Lisa's voice, younger and still hopeful, replied, "Sure, Margaret." I'd love to help with dinner. It's not Margaret to you, it's Mom. Although I understand why you're confused, considering you haven't had a real mother for a long time. The silence that followed on the tape recorder was the same silence that now filled the lawyer's office. Margaret had turned completely pale, her lips moving silently, as if trying to deny the words she had just heard in her own voice. Thompson turned off the tape recorder. This is just one of 47 similar recordings Robert collected. He systematically documented a pattern of psychological abuse that spanned more than 2 decades. Abuse. Margaret practically shouted. I raised that girl. I gave her a home, an education, opportunities she never would have had. While constantly reminding her that she didn't deserve any of it, Thompson replied calmly. Robert also documented the psychological consequences. He noted how Lisa developed social anxiety, how she began to apologize excessively for existing, how she systematically diminished herself in family situations. It was true. During the early years of our relationship, Lisa apologized for everything. For talking too much, for talking too little, for taking up space, for having opinions. It took years of therapy and a lot of love for her to begin to understand that she deserved to be heard and respected. He cheated on me, Margaret whispered, more to herself than to us. 25 years of marriage and he cheated on me. No, Lisa said for the first time since the recordings began, her voice firm and clear. He protected his daughter. Something you never did. Margaret turned to Lisa with an expression of pure hatred. You're not my daughter. You never were. It was a mistake we made when we were young and idealistic. I thought I could mold you, turn you into something worthy, but you've always been. Careful, I interrupted, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. Choose your next words very carefully. Margaret looked at me as if she had forgotten I was there. All these years, she had treated me as an optional accessory to Lisa's life, someone she tolerated because she had no choice. But now, for the first time, she saw something different in my eyes. James, Thompson said, consulting his notes. Robert left a specific message for you as well. He turned back to the main will and found the marked page. To James, who loved my daughter when her own family rejected her, who stood up for her when I was too cowardly to do so, who gave her the strength she deserved since she was a child. Thank you for being the son I always wanted. I felt my throat tighten. Robert had never said that to me in his life, but apparently he had been watching and evaluating much more than I had realized. Robert also left specific instructions on how to proceed should Margaret attempt to contest this will or continue her pattern of behavior during the reading. Thompson opened another folder, this one significantly thicker. He gave me full authorization to use all of the documentation as evidence in any subsequent legal proceedings. In addition, he established a very specific clause regarding the inheritances of his other 2 daughters. Margaret froze. What do you mean? If you attempt to prevent Lisa from receiving her rightful inheritance, or if you continue to try to exclude her from family decisions, the inheritances of your other 2 daughters will automatically be transferred to a trust fund that only Lisa can administer. Margaret's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, despair, and finally a kind of cold calculation that I recognized well. It was the same expression she wore when she planned her most elaborate humiliations. He couldn't have done that, she murmured. The girls, they didn't do anything wrong. Robert was well aware of that, Thompson continued. That's why he also included individual letters for each of his other daughters, explaining exactly why these measures were necessary. Letters that will only be delivered if this clause is activated. For the first time since I had known her, I saw Margaret completely speechless. She had spent decades orchestrating family situations to her advantage, manipulating emotions and loyalties like chess pieces. But Robert had played the game one level higher, anticipating her every possible move. Now, Thompson said, returning to the main document, we can proceed to the actual distribution of assets. And I must say, Robert was very specific about who gets what. Margaret sat down heavily, her posture changing from authoritative to defeated in a matter of seconds. But I knew that look. She was thinking, calculating, looking for a way out. What she didn't know was that Robert had thought of that too. And what was about to be revealed would turn everything we thought we knew about the family's financial situation on its head. Thompson returned to the main will, its pages carefully arranged in chronological order. Robert divided his fortune very specifically. For starters, the $2 million family home in Buckhead. Goes to me, of course, Margaret interrupted, her voice regaining some of its former authority. I'm the widow. It's my legal right. Actually, Thompson continued calmly, the house goes entirely to Lisa Morrison, along with all of Robert's furniture, artwork, and personal effects. The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret stood so still that for a moment I thought she had stopped breathing. The Buckhead house wasn't just an address, it was the status symbol she had cultivated for 25 years, the backdrop for all her elaborate humiliations of Lisa. That's impossible, she finally whispered. The house is in my name too. Robert removed your name from the deed 18 months ago, Thompson explained, consulting an additional document. He utilized a legal clause that allows for the transfer of joint ownership when there is documented evidence of psychological abuse against family members. Lisa squeezed my hand so hard I felt her fingers tremble. The Buckhead house was where she had been systematically excluded from family dinners, where Margaret forbade her from using the master bathroom because it wasn't appropriate for an adoptee, where she was forced to serve guests while the other daughters sat as guests of honor. But Margaret was far from defeated. I saw that calculating expression return to her eyes, the same one she wore when she planned her next humiliations. Robert has been ill for the past few years, she said slowly, as if testing the words. The cancer affected his judgment. Any competent lawyer can prove that he was not of sound mind when he made those changes. Thompson smiled, a small but significant smile. Interesting that you mentioned that, Margaret. Robert anticipated that exact claim. He opened a third folder, this one even thicker than the previous ones. Robert underwent comprehensive psychological evaluations every 6 months during the last 3 years of his life. Neuropsychologists, psychiatrists, experts in testamentary capacity. All certified that he was of sound mind right up until the end. Margaret paled again, but continued to search for loopholes. What about the other girls? He can't just leave Catherine and Susan with nothing. They're his biological daughters. Robert didn't leave Catherine and Susan without anything, Thompson clarified. Catherine will receive the Manhattan apartment and $500,000. Susan will receive the beach house on the East Coast and another $500,000. And me? Margaret asked, her voice now just a whisper. Thompson hesitated for the first time since the meeting began. Margaret, you will receive $50,000 and the furnishings of your bedroom. If the previous silence had been absolute, this one was deathly. Margaret processed this information slowly, her expression changing from shock to anger and then to something resembling sheer terror. 50,000? Robert left our house to that, to Lisa, and he left me $50,000. Robert meticulously documented his personal expenses over the years, Thompson explained. He calculated that Margaret cost the family approximately $2,300,000 in unnecessary purchases, extravagant travel, and questionable investments. The $50,000 represents exactly what was left after deducting that from what would have been her legitimate share. I remembered some of those unnecessary purchases. The collection of handbags worth $15,000 each that Margaret had accumulated but never used. The 3 trips to Europe with her friends that cost more than our car. The $80,000 investment in her sister's beauty salon, which went bankrupt in 6 months. Margaret stood up abruptly, her chair banging against the wall behind her. This is a conspiracy. You two planned this together. She pointed an accusing finger at Lisa. You manipulated my sick husband against me. Margaret, Lisa said calmly, I didn't even know there was a will until today. Liar. You've been a manipulative liar since the day you walked into our house. I felt anger rise in my throat, but before I could respond, Thompson intervened. Margaret, I need to inform you of one more provision. Robert included a behavior clause that applies effective immediately. What kind of clause? If you continue to attempt to intimidate, humiliate, or in any way harm Lisa, the $50,000 will be automatically transferred to a charity. Furthermore, any attempt to contest this will automatically activate the clause affecting Catherine and Susan's inheritances. Margaret froze. Her other 2 daughters knew nothing about this meeting. Catherine was finishing her PhD in psychology in Boston, and Susan had just gotten married and was planning her honeymoon. Losing their inheritance because of their mother's actions would be devastating for both of them. You don't understand, Margaret muttered, more to herself than to us. I did everything for the family. All the sacrifices, all the years taking care of the house, the girls. Including the years spending the family's money on frivolities while criticizing Lisa for costing too much when Robert was paying for her college? Thompson asked, consulting his notes. That was the first time I ever saw Margaret truly speechless. Robert had even documented her financial hypocrisies. If this story of family manipulation and delayed justice is tugging at your heartstrings, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how years of calculated cruelty can finally meet its comeuppance. Thompson continued reading, revealing more details that Robert had meticulously planned. The secret bank account he kept specifically for Lisa's expenses. The investments he had made on her behalf since she turned 18. Even an education fund that was set aside for our future children. Robert also left specific instructions about his funeral, Thompson added. He requested that only Lisa deliver the eulogy on behalf of the family. Margaret exploded. Never. I'm the widow. I'm the one who should. Margaret, Thompson interrupted firmly. Robert was very clear. If you attempt to interfere with the funeral arrangements or prevent Lisa from fulfilling his final request, all of your testamentary provisions will be immediately revoked. It was at that moment that I saw something change in Margaret's eyes. The anger was replaced by a kind of cold calculation that sent a chill down my spine. She was weighing her options, looking for angles Robert might not have considered. Very well, she said slowly, her voice regaining a strange calm. If that's how Robert wanted things. But as she feigned acceptance, I watched her hands clench into discreet fists beneath the table. Margaret was not the type to accept defeat easily. And something told me she was already planning her next move. What she didn't know was that Robert had thought of that too. And the final revelation that was about to come would completely transform our understanding of who Robert Hartwell really had been. Thompson paused dramatically, his eyes sweeping over Margaret with an expression that mixed professionalism and an almost imperceptible satisfaction. Margaret, there is one last provision that Robert asked me to reveal only if you demonstrated exactly the behavior we just witnessed. Margaret sat up straight in her chair, her expression changing from defeated to cautious. What behavior? The attempt to manipulate the situation, deny the evidence, and try to use the other daughters as emotional pawns, Thompson explained, opening a fourth folder sealed with red wax. Robert predicted your reactions with surgical precision. I watched Margaret calculate quickly. She was looking for a way out, a way to turn the situation around in her favor. It was exactly what she always did when she felt cornered. She turned herself from aggressor to victim. Robert was manipulated by both of you, she declared, pointing at Lisa and me. He was sick, confused. Any court would recognize that. Interesting that you mention courts, Thompson interrupted, pulling a thick envelope from the red binder. Because Robert also anticipated that you would try to contest this will in court. Margaret paled but maintained her defiant stance. So what? I have rights as a widow. No judge. Margaret, Thompson said calmly, do you really believe that Robert spent 3 years documenting abuse without consulting legal experts about the implications? It was then that I saw the first glimmer of real panic in Margaret's eyes. For the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely frightened. Thompson pulled out an official document with seals and signatures. 6 months ago, Robert initiated legal proceedings to separate the couple's assets. This document, signed by him and filed with the court, legally transfers all of the couple's joint assets to an independent entity. That's impossible, Margaret whispered. I would have been notified. You were notified, Thompson replied, pulling out a stack of letters. 17 notifications sent by registered mail to this address over the course of 6 months. All signed by you. Margaret took the notifications with trembling hands, examining the signatures. I don't remember signing this. Robert carefully documented that you signed these documents without reading them, assuming they were insurance or tax papers. He tested your tendency to sign anything he put in front of you. Margaret's expression changed from confusion to sheer horror. He tricked me. He protected your family, Lisa said for the second time, her voice gaining strength. Something you never did. Margaret turned to Lisa with renewed fury. You have no idea what I sacrificed for this family. What I gave up to raise you and your sisters. Actually, Thompson interjected, Robert documented exactly what you sacrificed. And what you gained. He opened a specific section of the will that he had kept separate. Margaret, Are you aware that Robert hired a private investigator to track your spending and activities over the last 5 years? The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret stood completely still, as if she had stopped breathing. The investigator uncovered some interesting inconsistencies. For example, the $43,600 in purchases you claimed were for home maintenance were actually spent on a private apartment you maintain in the city center. Margaret tried to speak, but only a strangled sound came out of her throat. The apartment where you were regularly meeting with David Brennan, the corporate lawyer. The same David Brennan who, curiously, has been representing you in divorce matters for the past 8 months. Lisa squeezed my hand so hard I felt her fingers tremble. Divorce. Margaret was planning to leave Robert while he was battling cancer. Robert knew, Thompson continued relentlessly. He knew about the apartment, about David, about the divorce plans you developed to ensure Margaret got the lion's share of the assets before the cancer progressed. Margaret finally found her voice, but it was only a desperate whisper. When did he find out? David Brennan made one crucial mistake, Thompson explained, almost smiling. He underestimated who Robert Hartwell was before he retired. Thompson addressed Lisa and me directly. Did you know that Robert was a prosecutor for 15 years before he went into private practice? Specializing in financial crimes and conspiracy. I felt my jaw drop. Robert had never mentioned this. To us, he had always been just a loving father and successful retired businessman. Robert recognized the patterns immediately. Margaret's meetings with David followed exactly the pattern he had prosecuted hundreds of times: spouses conspiring to hide assets prior to divorce proceedings. Margaret stood abruptly, her chair falling backward. I need to get out of here. Margaret, Thompson said firmly, please sit down. We're not done yet. No. This is a trap. You planned all of this. Actually, Thompson continued calmly, Robert planned all of this. And there is one last revelation. He withdrew a smaller envelope, this one with Margaret's name written in Robert's familiar handwriting. Robert left a final message specifically for you, Margaret. He asked me to read it only if you confirmed the pattern of behavior he documented. Margaret was visibly shaking now, her hands clutching the back of the fallen chair. Thompson opened the envelope and read in a clear, steady voice. Margaret, if you are listening to this, it means you have remained exactly who you have always been, even in the face of the evidence of your own actions. I hope that one day you will understand that love is not ownership, and that a family is not built through control and humiliation. Thompson's voice paused before continuing. But I also hope you know that I will never allow you to destroy Lisa the way you have tried to destroy me over the past few years. The difference is that Lisa has something I never had, a family that truly loves her. Margaret collapsed into her chair, tears finally beginning to stream down her face. And there's one final thing, Thompson added, consulting one last document. Robert has established a permanent fund to ensure that Lisa will never again be vulnerable to financial or emotional manipulation. A fund she can use not only for her own security, but to protect others in the same situation. Lisa looked at me, her eyes shining with tears of relief and gratitude. For the first time in 23 years, she was completely free from Margaret's power. But as we watched Margaret crumble before us, I realized that Robert had orchestrated something much greater than a simple redistribution of inheritance. He had completely rewritten our family's future. 2 years have passed since that transformative afternoon in Thompson's office. As I write these words, I'm sitting on the porch of our home in Buckhead, the same home where Margaret once reigned as a cruel queen, dictating who was worthy of sitting at the family dinner table. The change has been more profound than just changing addresses. Lisa has completely transformed every room in this house. The former cold and intimidating atmosphere has given way to a genuinely warm environment where everyone is truly welcome. The walls that once echoed with poisonous comments about adopted children who don't know their place now resound with the heartfelt laughter of friends, colleagues, patients, and even children whom Lisa occasionally welcomes into our home for consultations. Margaret never contested the will. We learned through Thompson that David Brennan, her lover and lawyer, abandoned her the day he learned about Robert's meticulous documentation. Apparently, David didn't have the stomach to take on a case where every piece of evidence pointed against his client, especially when he realized that Robert had included recordings of his own intimate strategic conversations with Margaret about getting rid of the problem children. The last detailed information we had about Margaret came from Catherine 3 months ago. She moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs of Atlanta, got a part-time job as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic, and, according to Catherine, underwent a dramatic and disturbing psychological change. She seems like a completely different person, Catherine told us during our monthly Sunday lunch, which now takes place regularly at our house. More humble, but also more lost. As if she'd spent her whole life playing an elaborate role, and now she has absolutely no idea who she really is underneath all that calculated cruelty. Catherine and Susan, the other daughters, were initially devastated and confused by the shocking revelations. But after reading the meticulously detailed letters Robert had left for each of them, 20-page documents explaining not only the abuse of Lisa but also how Margaret had manipulated their perceptions of their sister, they came to understand not only the situation but also their own silent complicity over the years. Catherine called me personally in the first week after the will was read. "James," she said, her voice breaking with genuine emotion and deep regret, "I always knew that Mom treated Lisa differently, but I never imagined it was so systematic, so scientifically cruel." Dad documented exact conversations that I witnessed and simply normalized as Mom's way. He even included transcripts of conversations where I participated in the humiliation without realizing it. Susan went even further in her quest for reconciliation. She canceled her planned honeymoon to Europe and came to visit us immediately. Sitting in the same elegant room where Margaret once forbade Lisa from using the good couches because expensive furniture isn't appropriate for adoptees, she held her sister's hands and cried for hours. "Lisa, please forgive me for not defending you all these torturous years. I was genuinely afraid of Mom's explosive reaction, but that's no excuse for my cowardice. You have always been my real sister, my sister from my heart, and I failed you when you needed support the most." It was a moment of deep and transformative healing that Robert, even in death, had made possible through his meticulous planning and posthumous courage. The substantial fund Robert had established for Lisa proved even more elaborate and visionary than Thompson had initially revealed during that tense meeting. It wasn't just robust financial protection, it was a complete and ambitious project for lasting social transformation. Robert had earmarked $2.8 million specifically to create a foundation to help other victims of psychological abuse in adoptive and biological families. Lisa now devotes 4 days a week to the Robert Hartwell Foundation for Healthy Families. She has developed completely revolutionary protocols for identifying extremely subtle patterns of emotional abuse in adoptive families and has created comprehensive support programs that have already dramatically transformed the lives of more than 350 people in situations similar to or worse than the one she endured for decades. Watching her work tirelessly with these vulnerable families, I see an extraordinary inner strength that years of Margaret's systematic cruelty failed to even scratch, let alone destroy. If anything, those painful and formative experiences have given Lisa an almost supernatural ability to recognize sophisticated manipulation tactics and complex patterns of emotional abuse that most highly trained professionals fail to detect even with years of experience. "You know what's really ironic about this whole situation?" Lisa said to me one night as we reviewed some particularly complex and challenging cases from the Foundation. "Margaret thought she was systematically teaching me that I wasn't worthy of love, respect, or family consideration. But what she really taught me without realizing it, was to instantly recognize when someone is deliberately and systematically trying to rob another person of their dignity, self-esteem, and sense of worth." Thompson remains not only our trusted attorney, but has also become a genuinely close and dear friend of our extended family. He recently told us that in his 45 years of diverse legal practice, he had never witnessed a will so meticulously planned and executed to right deep and long-standing family wrongs. "Robert was an absolutely brilliant strategist and visionary," Thompson explained to us during a memorable and emotional dinner at our renovated home. "But far more important than that, he was a genuinely loving father who spent his precious final years watching intently as his daughter suffered and systematically planning how to give her not only the justice she deserved, but also the concrete tools and substantial resources to thrive far beyond any cruel limitations that had been attempted to be imposed on her." The most deeply satisfying and lasting aspect of Robert's elaborately orchestrated revenge was not the calculated and devastating punishment of Margaret, but the complete, permanent, and transformative elevation of Lisa. Every carefully prepared document, every strategically collected recording, every meticulously planned legal strategy was designed not to destroy out of pure revenge, but to build something lasting, meaningful, and genuinely transformative. To give Lisa the public recognition she deserved, the substantial and lasting financial resources, and the influential social platform she always deserved but which Margaret systematically tried to deny her through decades of psychological manipulation. As for me, I have learned a fundamental and transformative lesson about true protection and genuine love. Sometimes the best way to authentically protect those we love is not to confront aggressors directly with impulsive anger, but to create permanent and robust systems that make aggression completely impossible to sustain, repeat, or perpetuate. Robert did this masterfully, transforming his own deep and unconditional love for Lisa into a literally unstoppable force for lasting and meaningful social change. The sweetest revenge was not to humiliate Margaret publicly, but to give Lisa a platform where her voice could finally be heard, respected, and celebrated. Last week, Lisa was invited to give a lecture at Emory University on identifying and preventing psychological abuse in family dynamics. The lecture was recorded and has already had over 50,000 views online. If you are watching this transformative story and have experienced similar situations of family manipulation, emotional abuse, or systematic exclusion, know that genuine and lasting justice sometimes comes in unexpected and surprisingly transformative ways. And if this epic journey of overcoming and cleverly orchestrated revenge has touched your heart deeply, subscribe to the channel to discover more truly inspiring stories of extraordinary people who have turned devastating personal trauma into lasting collective triumph. Margaret systematically tried to reduce Lisa to nothing for decades, completely erasing her identity and sense of self-worth. But Robert turned all that accumulated calculated cruelty into the powerful fuel for something much bigger, more meaningful, and more lasting than any of us ever imagined possible. Last week, Lisa received a deeply moving letter from a young woman, just 19 years old, whom our foundation helped escape from a psychologically and physically abusive foster family. The letter read, "Dr. Lisa, thank you for teaching me that true lasting family is not who shares your blood or your last name, but who genuinely honors, unconditionally protects, and celebrates your heart and soul every day." Lisa cried as she read those powerful, transformative words. But they were tears of deep gratitude and purpose fully realized, not of old, unhealed pain. Today, when I look at my wife working carefully and lovingly in the garden she planted and cultivates in our backyard, the same sacred space where Margaret once categorically forbade her from stepping foot because adopted children should always use the back entrance, I see the most complete, satisfying, and lasting victory possible. Margaret didn't just permanently lose her luxurious home and all her accumulated money. She irreversibly lost the ability to hurt anyone in the calculated, systematic, and devastating way she hurt Lisa for endless decades. And Lisa? She has gained something Margaret never managed to destroy, despite years of desperately trying: the absolute, unshakable, and lasting certainty that she deserves all the unconditional love, genuine respect, and transformative opportunity in the world. This is truly the sweetest, most complete, and most lasting revenge of all, turning pain into lasting purpose, trauma into inspiring triumph, and systematic cruelty into genuinely transformative compassion. After all, the best revenge isn't becoming just like your cruel oppressors. It's becoming everything they desperately and systematically tried to prevent you from being. Robert didn't just protect Lisa. He completely freed her to become the transformative force she was always meant to be.